This question appeared on one of our older videos and the user wanted to know basically how to get data from a closed Excel workbook. I've been answering a bunch of questions recently on how to do similar things, and the technique I've been using in those videos was basically to open up the Excel file, copy the data from it, and then close down the file again afterwards. Now there's nothing wrong with that technique, it works perfectly well, as you will have seen if you've watched those other videos, but it's not necessarily the quickest or most efficient way to get data from the closed workbook. In this video we're going to look at how to connect to the closed file but still retrieve information from it without ever opening up the file. To get started, I've got an almost blank workbook set up. I've saved it as a macro enabled file and the only information it contains at the moment is the set of column headings on sheet 1. The file that we're going to connect to I've saved in the same folder as this workbook, the Get Data From Closed Workbook file, and I've popped that in a subfolder called My Files. It's called movies.xlsx. That file is a little more full than the one we're going to write our code in. It's got a list of 1200 films with various columns of information that we're going to retrieve into the Get Data From Closed Workbook file. So I'm just going to close down the movies workbook for the time being and we'll connect to that shortly. And to get started, let's head into the developer tab and open up the Visual Basic Editor and then insert a new module into the project and create our subroutine called Get Data From Closed File. The techniques we're going to use in this video rely on the Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects library. So before we write any more code, let's head up to the Tools menu and choose References, and then we can scroll through the list of available references to find Microsoft ActiveX Data Objects. You should find there are several versions of that library installed on your machine, and I'm just going to go with the latest version available to me, which is 6.1. Once I've checked the box next to that, I can click OK, and I'll get lots of help now from the IntelliSense when I start referencing the classes of object defined in that library. The first class I'm going to use is the connection class, so I'm going to declare a variable called cn as an adodb.connection. So that represents effectively like a pipeline from this Excel workbook to the closed Excel workbook, which will allow us to transfer data backwards and forwards. Having declared that variable, I'd like to create a new instance of that class, so I'm going to say set cn equals new adodb.connection. And then we need to think about some of the properties of the connection we need to set. The most important property of a connection object is its connection string, and the connection string sets all sorts of properties for the connection, such as what file or database type we're connecting to, where the file is located, etc. ADO connections don't just have to connect to an Excel workbook, you can use them to connect to a vast variety of different file types and database types. To assign a string to the connection string property, we can say cn.connectionString equals, and then I'm just going to open and close some double quotes because I rarely type in my connection strings from memory. Every connection string is different. I use them frequently to connect to SQL Server databases, for example. To find the connection string you need, let me introduce you to the connectionstrings.com website for all your connection string needs. It's not the most exciting looking website, I'll have to admit, but it is an incredibly useful one. Here's an idea of the list of different types of things you could use ADO to connect to from your Excel workbook. I've already opened up the page that we need for connecting to Excel. So this is driven by the ACE database engine, so Microsoft ACE OLADB12. And there are various different configurations for various different versions of Excel. So the one we're going to go for, it was last updated for Excel 2007. So I know I'm working in Office 365 these days, but this option still applies. Now, do be slightly careful that you choose the correct connection string for the type of Excel file you're connecting to. So there's a different type for XLSX, XLSB and XLSM files. The file that I'm connecting to is an XLSX file. So at this point, I'm just going to copy this connection string to the clipboard. So I'll highlight that, press Ctrl and C, and then head back to my code and paste it inside those double quotes I've just entered. Now it will need a little bit of work to tidy it up, so I'm just going to split this across a few different lines to make it easier to work with. So I'm going to type in a space and an underscore after the equals operator, and then take the rest of the string down to the next line and hit Tab to indent that. then I'm going to find the first semicolon character there, close a set of double quotes after that, and then concatenate that with a space underscore, and then take the data source to the next line as well. I now need to open a set of double quotes for this new part of the string, and then I'll find the next semicolon character, finishing just after the file path, close some double quotes, ampersand, space underscore, and hit enter to take the rest of the string down to the next line. Open some more double quotes for extended properties. Now, a slight bit, something that's easy to trip up with here. The extended properties is passed in as a string within the connection string. So the extended properties are Excel 12.0 XML header equals yes. So this indicates that we have a header row in the workbook. Now, because this is contained within a set of double quotes that are within themselves within a set of double quotes, we're going to find a syntax error when I click away from that line. So we have a couple of options to solve that. To enclose this string within the correct set of double quotes, we could either double up our double quotes within the connection string, that works, but potentially looks a little confusing. So alternatively, we can replace the double quotes with single quotes instead. So that's perfectly acceptable as well. The last thing I need to do is update my my folder path, my file and folder path, because I'm not going to connect to my Excel 2007 file.xlsx. I want to connect to the workbook called movies.xlsx in the My Files folder in the same folder as this workbook. So I'm going to take the C:\/ all the way up to the .xlsx and then backspace that to delete it. Then I'm going to close some double quotes after the equals operator and then concatenate that with a reference to the path of this workbook. So I'm just going to say ampersand this workbook.path and then concatenate that with a backslash my files backslash movies.xlsx. So let me just bring that space back there. Okay, so now that I've done that, we should be pointing to the correct file. And as a very quick sense check, all I'm going to do at this point is attempt to open up the connection I've created and then close it down again afterwards. So I'm going to say cn.open, give myself a few blank lines, and we'll add some interesting code there shortly, but just for testing purposes, say cn.close. I'm going to use the F8 key just to step through this. Everything should work up to this point, but it's the open line that we're interested in. If this doesn't throw any kind of error, if apparently nothing happens, then everything's good. If we saw a runtime error at that point, of course, we've got some problem solving to do. So I'm just going to close down the connection and then end the subroutine. So we've successfully connected to that Excel workbook, but without opening up the file. Now we can retrieve some data from the file we've just connected to, and in order to do that we need a container to hold the information that we're going to transfer through this connection. So the container that we're going to create is called a Recordset. Let's declare a variable dim rs as adodb.recordset. After opening up the connection, I'm then going to create a new instance of the Recordset class, so I'll say setRs equals new adodb.recordset. And then a couple of basic properties to set. I'm going to say rs.activeConnection. So it needs to know which connection to use to get the data from. So that's nice and easy. It's equal to cn. It's the only connection we currently have open. And then I need to set the source for the record set. This is where, if you know anything about writing SQL queries, you're at a huge advantage because we can set the source of a record set to be equal to a simple SQL Select statement. So inside some double quotes, I'm going to write select. This text isn't case sensitive, by the way, but I tend to write my SQL keywords in all caps. And then I want to select every column. So I'm going to use the asterisk symbol to represent all columns from, and then I need to refer to the worksheet in the workbook that contains all of the data. I'm going to put the worksheet's name inside some square brackets. And I know that the worksheet's name happens to be sheet 1, and I need to follow that with a dollar symbol to indicate that it's a worksheet. Then I can say rs.open. And again, just to do a quick sense check, I'm going to give myself a couple of blank lines and say rs.close. And before I attempt to do anything with the data that I have hopefully extracted from the file, I would like to step through this procedure to make sure that everything I've done is actually going to work. So the connection is currently open. I'm going to set the Recordset's connection to the one we've just opened, set the source to that select statement, and then attempt to basically execute that query and return all of the results. So no errors, that's a good sign. I could then close down the Recordset, close down the connection, and then end the subroutine. All we need to do now is write the information we've extracted into the worksheet. And this is by far and away the easiest part of the entire process. If I just quickly switch back to Excel, I want my new data to appear from cell A2 on sheet 1. So to make that work, I'm going to reference the sheet 1 object using its code name. So I'll say sheet1.range A2 dot, and then there's a dedicated method used to copy information from a Recordset object. It's inventively called copy from Recordset. If I type in a space, I've got to specify where my data comes from, and that comes from a Recordset object. And there's only one available to this procedure at the moment. It's called RS. So let's pass that in there. And all we need to do then is run the subroutine, and we should find, when we look back at Excel, all of the data from that closed workbook has suddenly appeared in this open workbook. Now from this point on, there are lots of interesting things we can do by modifying the Recordset source. And again, if you know anything about SQL Select statements, you'll already have some good ideas in mind, I think. But before we get onto the exciting, interesting stuff, let's just do a little bit of housekeeping. I want to make sure that when I copy my new set of data into the worksheet, it changes all the column widths to be the correct width to read all of the data. And I want to make sure that each time I run my subroutine, the current table of results has been cleared out. So let's head back into the VB editor first, and I'm going to add a new line just after I've copied from my record set. I'm going to say sheet1.range A1.current entire column.autofit. So that will make sure all the columns are the correct width. To clean out the worksheet before we try to get some more data into it, I'm going to head up to the top of the subroutine, and before I do anything at all, I'm going to say sheet1.range A1.current region. Now I don't want to get rid of everything from the worksheet. I don't want to delete the column headings. So I'm going to move the current region down by one row using the offset property. So I'll say offset 1, 0, and then I can apply the clear method to that block of cells, and that will tidy everything up. Now let's say that I didn't want to get the entire worksheet of data from that workbook. I only wanted to get a small range of cells. If I know the cell references, I can specify those after the sheet reference inside the square brackets. So in this case, I'm going to say A1:D11, just for the sake of argument. I'm starting at row 1 there because I've specified in my connection string that the file has a header row. So I won't actually copy in the header row again, but it's important to reference that block of cells. What I can then do is run the subroutine again, and when I look back at the data, I can find that I've only got the first 10 films from the list pasted in from cell A2. Now what if I wanted to get a specific set of columns from the source data? If I refer back to the original question, one of the suggestions here was to get values from columns D, G and K pasted into columns A, B and C of the open file. So D, G and K, if I look at my column headings, are runtime, studio and budget. So to get those specific columns, what we can do back in the VB editor is get rid of the cell references from the end of the sheet reference there, and then update the list of columns we're trying to refer to. So rather than using an asterisk to select all columns, I can write a comma-separated list of column names. Now the first column name, runtime, contains a space, so it's very important that I enclose the column name in a set of square brackets. So in some square brackets I can type in runtime, then a comma, and I don't need to write the next column name studio in square brackets because it's a single word with no spaces, but for consistency's sake I would wrap that column name in square brackets as well. And then the final column name was budget. Okay, so having done that now, I can run the subroutine, and we should end up with the runtime, the studio, and the budget in the first 3 columns of our output sheet. This technique works nicely when you have a sensible set of column headers to reference, but we can still retrieve the values from specific columns even when there are no column headers in the source data. Just to make that work, we need to know what column number or which field number we're trying to retrieve. So to get the exact same data here, the runtime column is the fourth column or the fourth field. Studio would be field 7 and budget would be field number 11. So to get this to work, it's going to be a little bit odd in one respect, but I'll explain why as we go along. Let's head back and update our connection string first to say that there are no column headers in that worksheet. That of course is going to mean that the first row of information in that file is going to be treated as a row of data. So we can then update our field names. So rather than runtime, we can say F4. Rather than studio, we can say F7. And rather than budget, we can say F11. And if I run the subroutine at this point, it will execute and I'll get a set of results. So you can see that the first row represents now the column headers from the source file. Only the studio column header has been printed out, and that's because that row is trying to be treated as a row of data. And because the value that would have been in that cell would have been the words runtime, that doesn't match the data type of all of the other values in that column, so it's excluded from the results. Studio is text, as are all the values in that column, so that one prints out. But likewise, budget has a column of numbers, but the word budget, of course, is text, so that gets excluded as well. So let's just reset things back to normal. Let's go back and we'll choose to specify that the file does have column headers. So we'll set no to yes. And then I'm just going to go back and replace the list of column names with the asterisk to select all the column names. Run the subroutine again and just check that we've got everything back in its normal place. So that covers some of the basic things you can do to influence the results returned by the query. But perhaps the most useful thing you can do is learn how to use the where clause. The where clause allows you to apply criteria to the query to restrict the number of rows returned. So as a simple first example, let's say I only wanted to return rows where the value of the Oscar wins column is greater than 0. So I only want to see Oscar winning films in this result set. To do that, I can head back to my Visual Basic editor, and then at the end of my select statement, so select everything from sheet 1, where, and then I can refer to the column name I'm interested in, so that was Oscar wins, and because that has a space in it, I have to wrap it up in some square brackets. And then I can either say greater than 0 or greater than or equal to 1. It doesn't really matter in this basic example. And if I run the subroutine at that point, we'll see that the set of results we've got this time is a little smaller than previously, and now the Oscar wins column only contains films with at least one Oscar win. You can add multiple conditions to the same where clause to limit the list even further. So let's say as well as Oscar winning films, we only want to see films in the science fiction genre. To do that, we can head back to the Visual Basic editor, and then at the end of the where clause, we need to add on another condition using either the AND logical operator or the OR logical operator. And OR work in SQL queries in the exact same way they work in VBA. So if you have an AND, then both conditions must be met. If it's an OR, then either condition must be met. So in this case, I wanted an AND condition, and I wanted to refer to the genre field. And I want to check if its value is equal to the words science fiction. To refer to a string of text, it's a little like we did for the connection string here when we wanted to wrap up this string in some delimiter characters. We can use single quotes to delimit the string that we're searching for, so science fiction. Having done that, if I run the subroutine again, we'll end up with an even shorter list of films, the Oscar-winning science fiction films. Let's limit this list even further by showing only those films which match all the current criteria and whose title begins with the word star. So let's head back to the Visual Basic editor, and then after the genre equals science fiction, at this point it might make sense to break this statement across multiple different lines. Actually, it's getting a little long. So I'm going to use a space underscore to take the beginning of the select statement onto its own line. And then I'll keep the select star from on its own line, close the double quotes at that point, space underscore, and then on the next line concatenate that with the where clause. So where Oscar wins is greater than or equal to 1 and genre equals science fiction, and then in the same set of double quotes here, and title. And then I'm going to use the like operator, which allows me to use wildcard characters when searching within a text field. So again, I'm going to wrap this up in some single quotes, and I'm going to write the word star. And then the wildcard characters in SQL are different to those in VBA. So in VBA, if you're familiar with using the like operator in VBA, you'd be tempted to use an asterisk symbol there to represent any characters. But in SQL, you use the percentage symbol to do the same thing. So that's any film that begins with the word star followed by any set of characters. So having done that, I'm going to run the subroutine again, and when we switch back to Excel, we'll find a list of all the films that begin with the word star that have at least one Oscar win and are in the science fiction genre. So there we go, that's how you get data from a closed workbook using Excel VBA. Just in case you're interested in learning a little more about how ADO works and about how SQL queries work, we do have a couple of extra playlists you might be interested in. So we have one on writing SQL Server queries, taking you from the very first principles of writing a select statement through to some fairly complex queries by the end of that little playlist there. If you don't have a SQL Server to play with, then you might prefer sticking in Excel VBA. And we have a separate playlist here which talks about how you use ADO to connect to things like an Access database, which you may be more likely to have access to. So hopefully that answers the original question. If you have any more questions on that topic, please feel free to ask in the comments below. I'll do my best to keep on answering the questions. Otherwise, thanks for watching. See you next time.